So, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very happy to welcome you to another session of our talk series, Manan, which was started as a platform for exchange of ideas between professionals and novice. And we're very happy to have with us today architect Jude D'Souza. Welcome, sir. So, Jude sir has graduated from Sir J. J. College of Architecture in the year 2003. He has done his postgraduate fellowship at Kamla Raheja. He has taught and guest lectured at various architecture colleges across the country and is currently a visiting faculty at Kamla Raheja. He is also the founding principal of JDAP, an award-winning architectural firm with offices in Mumbai and Bangalore. This topic for today's talk is called Building Ideas, and I'm sure we all are very curious to what this talk holds for us today. So we're looking forward to your presentation, sir. So,
Great. Thanks, Ayushi.
so unfortunately, Principal Professor Rajiv Mishra will not be able to join us today.
No problem.
Okay, we will hope to have a very active discussion after your presentation. So
Thanks.
that I think we can start with your presentation now.
Thanks, Ayushi, and thanks to Sir JJ for having me over. It's been a long while, and it's a strange time. So I think it would have been nice to have this and end at the canteen on the workshop. But yeah, so here we are. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and so what I've understood is we'll have a presentation and then we'll have a question and answer after that. However, if anyone during the presentation really wants to kind of ask questions, you're more than welcome to. All right, so I share my screen. Today, I actually want to talk about ideas. I think it's very interesting to talk about ideas, and we don't often talk about them, especially in practice when we are, so caught up with day to day and clients and all of that. So it's important to kind of step back and look at where everything starts, and that's with the idea. So I'm going to talk about the ideas on the basis of which a lot of our work is based. Starting with some bad news. Okay, so today computers can draft, they can compose music, they can even design, they can document very well. So in a couple of years, artificial intelligence will be able to design your very basic buildings much faster and probably much more efficiently than architects. So the question is, what is the future for architecture? What future do we have? All of you guys are going out into the world. So this must sound pretty not great news for you guys, right? But so the good news is that the creative work of architecture, any creative enterprise, any creative work will not be replaced by the computer. Then the second question after that is architectural creative work purely artistic, or can architecture ask bigger questions, more substantial questions, more holistic questions? And I think as our work, in our work, we actually look at that. We don't look at architecture purely as an artistic, as an aesthetic exercise, but it's a much more holistic, and we like to ask those bigger, more difficult questions. And that's what I believe is relevant in the kind of context that we are in. And so I've structured the talk as a series of these ideas in the form of these questions. And how do these ideas kind of feed into building? The first idea is about nature, and nature as a giver of form. This was a project that very long time back, is probably not too much older than you guys at that time. This was a leaf, the form of a leaf, which is made in cane. And so what was interesting about studying the structure of the leaf was to understand that in a leaf, there's no real distinction between what's the structure and what's the skin. What's the actual skin and what's the structure. It's one thing. So this model was made as an attempt to kind of understand that structure. And then the thought about how could one, use something like bamboo, which is a building material which is extremely sustainable, and kind of reconstruct this leaf in the form of a freestanding pavilion-like space. We exhibited this at the at the Shanghai Expo, and it was part of a bamboo pavilion. So the idea was, how do you build a lightweight structure derived from nature, derived from the form of the leaf, and this was, so it was in China. So we kind of showed how, on large public places, these could just be installed as very lightweight. It's just fabric and bamboo derived from the form of the leaf. Now, couple of years after this, I was involved with the CIDCO Exhibition Center, and so one sees the learnings from that, in terms of structure and skin being not very different from each other. So in this building, this is a model of literally how the structure is. You will not see any trusses hanging below. You will not see anything below the skin of the roof. It's just one thing, and we could not have done this without that model that was done so many years back, which gave an insight into how structure might work. Of course, I think many of you all must be familiar with the CIDCO Exhibition Center building, and so everything that you see here is actually structural, including the inclined end truss, the arches, and even the skylights, in fact, are structural. It's an inclined truss which actually spans between these sets of columns. So nature as a giver of form is an idea that one we look at pursuing in various ways, and seeing how because nature is really an inexhaustible source of inspiration. I don't think we've even scratched the surface as far as architects to know how much is possible. This project is, we call it the tree staircase. This is part of a larger project. I just picked a little bit of it. The tree columns, so you see that this is actually the top of the staircase, and we have just square box columns, 250 mm by 250 mm, which then branch out in the form of like trees, as just 3 columns supporting the whole stair. This is then how it was finally built, where you see, this is of course the model, and this is the built structure. You see the 3 columns, you can't see the third one just a bit here, which go up. It holds a cantilevered landings. This whole, the passage on the upper level is actually held just on 2 brackets. And the idea of the roof being this lightweight, very ethereal membrane which kind of sits over this. And therefore the idea of the tree was appropriate, where you had a stem, and that actually branches into something very delicate at the top of the building. These are the, so it's for little children, so it is painted bright yellow, so that it's something that they would enjoy running up and down. And of course, the realization of ideas, and how do you translate this into something that's buildable. So this was, of course, model software. We did a full-scale mock-up in a workshop. Actually, and these are with all standard sections, box sections, plates, standard sections that anyone uses, and these the branches were actually water jet cut with water jet, and then they were welded together. And it's structural. There is no additional, this is a 40 mm plate, so it's actually holding the roof. So yeah, a full scale mock-up in the workshop, and then we kind of brought it to site, and it was erected very fast on the site. So this is then finally how it looks, and then we yeah, so the branch is holding up the roof, and here it is finally with some other trees around. The tree staircase stands and finds its place there. Of course, there's more to the building. There's interior space, but I think that as far as this first theme of form from nature, the idea that we can actually look at nature, understand abstract those forms holistically, not just aesthetically, through structure, through all the possibilities that exist within that form. Moving people and moving buildings. So this set of projects actually, for some people it may not seem like architecture, but it actually comes from the understanding that we as architects have of the city, and what architects and what we need to how we can contribute in terms of understanding of the city. This is a project called the Walker Bike. So the bicycle is one of the best machines ever invented, and it's extremely efficient. It's extremely elegant. The bicycle works as part of the larger transportation systems that exist. So we were interested in something called what is called the last mile connectivity. Last mile connectivity means that you go from A to B by a train, but how do you get from the train station to your house? So how do you get from the train station to your office or your college? So we were interested in this and a device or a machine which could help in that last mile connectivity. And what happens is that with a bicycle, you need to be dressed up to ride a bicycle. And often, we're not, like, I wouldn't ride a bicycle if I was dressed in like this. So we looked at getting a bicycle that you could literally walk on. Instead of the sitting on a bicycle, you could walk. And therefore we looked at the elliptical motion rather than the circular motion of a bicycle. We call this the walker bike because you're literally walking, and it gives you mechanical advantage. And this is finally how it was designed, and this is how it would go across the city, can get folded, and some details. So again, these ideas actually came out of an understanding of the city and how, as architects, we need not remain confined to certain domains. That building only means that you will have you don't just build buildings. There are so many more things that you can build. From moving people to moving buildings, this was a competition that we won at. This was an international competition, and it was for a traveling healthcare clinic. It was in Southeast Asia, and they wanted a clinic which you could kind of pack up into the back of a truck and take away. So again, the idea was using bamboo, the parabolic arch, the stable frame, which could then be unfolded and then assembled into. So this is so it comes in a box. You open the frames, you lay the frames out, and then you just open it up, literally like you're all unpacking, literally unpacking a building. And the use of bamboo, the use of fabric, the use of local material to actually create a clinic which would not be alien to a rural setting, but people would kind of relate to it, and people could feel part of it. So there are actually two courtyards. One is the public courtyard, and one is the courtyard where the actual clinic would happen. So it actually wound its way around two courtyards. Right. So we've been involved in a lot of smart city projects. I think you guys might have heard of the smart city urban renewal mission. So we've done several cities, six cities at last count, where we've done plans for them. So I just picked some projects out of them. Um, this is Kalyan railway station. So Kalyan, so in this, one thing to understand is that the actual railway station and the railway station premises is under the railways, whereas the outside, the precinct around the station is something that the municipal corporation is involved with and is responsible for. So we were not on the station, we were outside the station. So we this started with so it's the precinct. How do you develop a precinct around the railway station? We started by looking at mapping and understanding all the movements of various movements. And like any railway station, you know, you have multiple kind of movements, multiple kind of activities around. So after that, what we did was that we said that we need to segregate movement. Everyone cannot be, you know, your autos, your taxis, your and Kalyan incidentally had tongas, and buses and private vehicles, but you know, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, they cannot all be at the same level unmanaged. So we actually created a multi-level deck, and we did something which was, um, you know, quite remarkable in this project. Is we made uh, two government bodies talk to each other. Yeah, so usually, you know, government bodies never talk to each other. Kalyan Dombivli Municipal Corporation will never talk to the transport authority. So we saw that we had a bus depot here, and this was the largest. If you see where my mouse is, this was the largest patch of land which was available for anything. You know, otherwise there's very little land. So we propose that we'll elevate the existing bus depot, take it above, and use the base for parking, and for pedestrian amenities. So I mean, these are kind of, you know, when you think of it, you know, we were not sure if, like, because even though they're both government bodies, uh, we don't know if they'll agree with each other. But this is something that started off as an idea. We kept talking about it, and finally it's done. Like, you know, there is an MOU signed, memorandum of understanding signed, where the bus depot will actually go up. And so what we've ensured is that pedestrians are move out at the same level. So when you cross your bridge, you're actually moving across at the same level, and creating much larger um, pedestrian friendly areas around the station, putting the pedestrian first, pedestrian public transport first. These are some plans of the area, and this is then the deck, which becomes the pedestrian deck. And usually you see, you know, areas like skywalks are actually become very limited, because they just conceive of just moving people from A to B. But you know, at railway stations, there's so much more that has to be accommodated. So we looked at more generous decks, larger decks where hawking was allowed, where people are allowed uh, to wait for auto rickshaws, and much more a sense of natural light, coming down. They're not these dark, dingy spaces, but there's spaces where you actually are much more relaxed, getting off a train, rather than usually like how are severely underprovided and under-designed stations are currently. So this is actually under construction as a design build project. So all of these drawings actually go to the contractor, and then they build basis those. Yeah, so this is a plot which is then so we opened up a plot because we could, optimize. We opened up a plot which the railways can then build and sell and make some money to partially fund this project. So we've also done Thane railway station. I think in the interest of time, I will not go into this too much, but similar ideas of an elevated deck This is Thane East. Thane West is already done a station improvement scheme, and looking at an elevated ERTS which comes in and segregating movement. Right. The third part is about the house. All architects love doing houses, and we are no different. So the ideas about the house are we look for houses that are not extravagant, not architecture for architecture's sake, but houses which actually end with their context, which actually bring the context inside and which connect to nature in a very simple, very primal manner. This is called the Twin House. This is north of Bombay, and so it again a low budget. This is a low budget house, and we had a fixed budget. We had to work within that, and it's a heavy rainfall area like all of Bombay, and so we were looking at the sloping roof as an idea, and looking at doing it in RCC and not doing it in steel with cheating. So, however, what we did is we said that instead of the typical sloping roof where you actually build it parallel, we said let's build a diagonal. So we each of these roofs are actually going diagonally across the space, which actually just changed the whole idea of a sloping roof. And so every side that you see this building, it looks different, though all it's doing is just taking a roof and bending it along the folding it along the diagonal. It was a small house. It was a just 2 bedrooms here, a kitchen over here, and living. It was entirely built. So the slab is there are no beams in between. There's just a folded slab. So again, the idea that sometimes reducing an idea to a very simple gesture. In this case, just that folded roof, and that was it. So in fact, in this case, personally, I think the walls are they're just incidental. The roof does everything. So one gives very open, very connected spaces which actually connect to the outside. Of course, since nothing like there's none of this is structurally required, it's much lighter, and the house just opens up to the outside. This is actually part of a larger complex with many plots, and this was then the first one, which which then got built. So the next 2 projects actually are in Bangalore. They're in a place called Nandi Hills, and so this is an area again north of Bangalore, outside. The project was called Crescent Hill, and here instead of the folded roof, what we said is let us bend the roof. Let us kind of look at one roof which achieves different heights, but it's instead of a facet, it's just a sloping, just a curved roof. So picked 4 points, bent it across, so you had a greater height where you had a double story, and then it stepped down. And then we carved out areas where actually you could have the entrance court on one side and then the inner court on the other. This is how it finally looks. And so again, this is a form which actually a form of a house which it keeps changing as you move across, the kind of attitude towards the street, the attitude towards the courtyard. All of these, they actually change because of that gesture of the roof. So it bends down towards the inner court, and then the carved out court with this stair which actually takes you to the bedroom above. The next project is actually also in Nandi Hills, and so both of these are actually larger developments. So this is a module, and that house module then repeats across the entire development. So some ideas related to the plan, related to the master plan, is also the fact that how do you, in a large development, how do you give everyone a sense of individuality, everyone a sense of community? Um, and therefore some ideas about staggering the roads, building along with the landscape, not building against the landscape. Everyone goes to these hills and the first thing they say is, let us flatten it out, which is quite a ridiculous thing to do. So we actually looked at working along with the land, and that gave us our plan, because we said, let us maintain the slopes and make the streams, the natural streams, the main things around which the development is designed. And all the streams, they're seasonal streams. They actually collect a small pond at the bottom, and that's where we put the clubhouse and all of the community facilities. You see that the roads are not these, we staggered the roads so that they're actually the slower moving traffic. And all of these, the different grays, shades of gray, actually terracing. So they actually terrace down from the upper level over here and down to the lake at the bottom, to the pond at the bottom. Again, these are not very high budget houses, and they're modular. So, looking at very simple, very light, and very easy to build as well, frames. And the house then is this fragmented, much more lighter, much more delicate presence in the landscape, which with their own sense of internal space, internal courtyards, where the house looks onto. And within the module, there were variations. So even though it's the same module, one house looks different from the other. And yeah, so that's how it. And then you see the whole stepping down of the stream, which actually takes you all the way to the bottom, becomes the main something which distinguishes this housing development and something which gives character to the space. So, working along with the landscape and letting that dictate what kind of development we did was a very important, and this is the lake at the bottom, the entire development here. Right. From the individual house, we moved to collective living. This was a competition, again, we won at, which was looking at how do we have a house and a farm together. So we took a module, we said that, okay, there are 4 houses, let the roofs be green. And instead of it being one flat green, let us create a terrain, almost like a man-made hill, where, it becomes an interesting interconnected terrain. So you could actually grow food on the top. This is, of course, an ideas competition. So we really had to push the ideas, to their to the logical extreme. And how does this entire roof get planted? And yeah, looking at the houses as just these cores, like a different set. So you'll have the structure, and different skins could actually come in and finish the house. So this is how it would look, with this whole undulating terrain on the roofscape, and a lot of light coming downstairs. So um, even though this is not a competition which is intended for building, it's so competitions do a couple of things. One is, within the office, it helps build a lot of skill. People really kind of are able to do work very fast and at high levels of high quality. And they also seed ideas which lead to other projects, live projects in the market. And yeah, the entire development almost like an undulating hill. Another winning competition for this time in Mumbai. This was by a builders, a lobby group which are looking at rental housing. So it was low cost, but of course, low cost does not mean substandard. So we we looked at ways that we can, for such a dense development, how do you get green space for everyone, which is accessible? So we actually split the building into 2, And midway, we said that you can actually have a garden. So no one is more than 4 or 5 stories away from walking down to a garden. The building was porous, so that light and ventilation actually penetrates through. And this idea led us to the project in Bangalore, which is a large 12-acre development, um, and which maybe I'll just quickly run through these. We looked at um, each of those buildings designed as per the orientation considering climate. Um, Circulation space, that is movement space within the building, is not just corridor and staircases, it's space where people come together. So those were given a lot of importance. Angling, if you look at this drawing, angling houses away from each other. So no one is staring across at a house opposite, but they're looking away, and a certain sense of privacy. Every house has at least 3 sides open, and everyone has a little bit of green, little planter bed. And this, what you see here, is something that carries over from the rental housing competition, which is a second ground at an upper level, which then connects all these buildings together and becomes that connecting terrain and social space at an upper level. So this is the larger development where the entire green is open to the road. So it's not inside and enclosed, but it's much more open, much more public. And yeah, so this is currently under construction, and this so a couple of other things where you see that the alternate floors are actually staggered, so everyone does not have the same configuration. Everyone has a little bit of garden in form of a planter bed, and yeah, and this is then the 4-story connecting bit which actually goes across and becomes this large connecting um, public space at an upper level. You see the staircases, so that in order that these become live active spaces and not just dead corridors or dead staircases. This staircase actually cantilevers out from here, and a little bench here, so you can actually sit down, look down onto this area. There's railings which are coming up. These are the large verandas. So instead of looking at corridors, we looked at almost verandas where people can come out and look down onto the green below. This is the connecting 4th story. These are still to go up, and you see the alternating balconies. The planter beds are just getting done, and again the verandas looking down with the staircase on one side. And some details on how the staircase railing kind of it's just supported here and here, and it's almost again like a beam which goes across this entire length. Balconies plus planter beds integrated, so you can actually sit right here and have a planter bed right outside your window. Okay. So the next part is about the scale of ideas. Do ideas have scale? Is there something which is too big to not be suited for ideas, or something too small? And the next 2 projects will talk about that. This is a project for a factory. It's a large 20-acre development. It's a packaging plant. So so in a project like this, the clients are not looking for invention. No one is looking for something new, because there's a very set way in which things have to be done. In such a case, what do you do, and how do you kind of contribute as an architect, which goes again beyond merely deciding that the color of the building is white, or aesthetic concerns. So of course, how do you design it for efficiency? How do you design it so that the column grids, how everything is integrated together. And in this case, one thing we said is that uh, this is a huge building. So it's 300 meters long. It's about 80 meters deep. We said, let's not have anything on the front of the building. Now, if you imagine what you would see usually is that you will actually have rainwater downtakes, you'll have some ventilation systems. So this is a slope which actually slopes down straight 80 meters without a break, high point here, low point at the back, and everything is actually organized at the back of the building. Your air conditioning, your air cooling, your firefighting, all your systems at the back. The office building which latches onto this and then looks into the factory floor. The integration of structure along with the skylights, along with all of your services, is something that is very important in industrial buildings. To actually, and this is a pre-engineered building, so there's certain, certain limitations within which one works for pre-engineered buildings. To actually create this very clean, very well integrated shell within which then the factory could actually happen. So even in such projects, of course, to much lesser degree, because these are projects which are highly process driven. So even in these projects, there is, the room for an idea. There is room to actually, push certain ideas. And this is the roof. It's almost like a landscape. It goes out, 300 meters this way, 80 meters the other way. And it's just one sheet. This each of these is a single sheet which just goes across. It's called standing seam sheets. It's unrolled from one end, and then these are not piers fixed, they just zip, they just clamp together. So this is one level of the scale. This is another, I think this is a GIF, which is not, so this was about 200,000 square feet. And this is, 200,000 square meters. And this is 100 square meters. It's 1,000 square feet office. This was for an engineering practice, the structural engineers. So we actually looked at ways in which the practice of a structural engineer, which is involving understanding of structure, understanding of material, how can that be reflected in the space that they're working with? It's a very small space. This is in Thane, and so we actually referenced a lot of structural concepts in this, and you have this large. So it was a higher story height, so we didn't put any AC ducts across the space, so we just kept the AC ducts at two ends, and the main studio space was blown up. So if you see here, this is a balcony with a large library wall, and a balcony with a timber seat, which looks onto the studio space. And then it takes a dip. The railing kind of takes a dip where the roof, where the ceiling drops down. So ideas of the balanced cantilever. So you see this. These are all designed. None of these were bought out. The workstations are actually these balanced cantilevers, and all of this is mild steel. We just left it. We said that these are engineers. They're working with steel and concrete all day. They need to see it. So we kept it exposed. We took some salyas from a site, and then we bent them to create this this place to kind of put up their paintings on and the work on the wall. So these are also laser cut plates which actually hold up this balcony. Very slim cantilevered bits, which lead up to this balcony at the top. So again, there's this play of structure here, because we have these can be called our columns, and you have a bracket, then you have a second one, then you have a second cantilever, and then you have, so it keeps its multiple cantilevers on one, just on one profile. This seat that you see is everyone's favorite seat, and everyone would kind of go there and sit up and grab a book, and but there's no structure beneath it. So this is also where you expect to see, I don't know if you can see it in this corner, but you'd expect to see something supporting it, but we kept it as glass. So there's various ways in which we've actually played around with ideas of structure, as well as brought a sense of a studio environment for a design, their structural design practice. So we had to give them that sense. Yeah, so this is the upper level with the seat looking down. That's the conference room there. So really, uh, I think if you see across, like, if in a project like this, which is mainly interior driven, or a project like, and there are many more projects, I'm just picking a few. So, the one can actually look for room to to kind of have these seminal important ideas that you then run throughout the project with them. Right. Now this, I think this is, yeah, the section after this. Looking at the city, I'm going to go quickly through this. So we do, typically we do 1 or 2 research projects every couple of years. And this is completely funded internally by our office. And we do it out of interest, out of a passion for the city. And here we've actually looked at, this was presented at a conference internationally in London. And we looked at the relation between building typology, like, high rise, low rise, courtyards, chawl typology, and density. How do we relate and actually have some relation between the two? So we just modeled various typologies of buildings, whether it's a linear typology, this, like a triangular form, courtyard building typology, point towers, and the whole idea was to actually see, we have very random ways of deciding FSI, at very global levels. It will just be decided, okay, a global FSI is 3 or FSI is 4. Do we know whether the buildings and the plots can actually support those kind of densities in terms of just ensuring a reasonable quality of living environment? We just tested this across, and finally we did an evaluation of the various typologies. You see the typologies lined up here, and then the metrics. How do these metrics line up? And of course, this is much more. I'm just going at a very higher level over this, but this is one idea of building, the idea of the city. The other is looking at city centers. So we've been looking at city centers, and we looked at Bangalore as a city, and how can one reimagine the center of the city. So we went and pulled up old maps of the city and understood how the city really developed over time. So Bangalore is India's fastest growing city, but it was never really designed, never really conceived of as a commercial center. It was a garrison town. It was, and then became an administrative center. So we actually understood how the core of the city developed, and a lot of the issues we realized is because of that. The baggage, literally, of history, that it was never really conceived of as a commercial center. So what you have today is you have all of these roads which actually just crisscross through the center of the city, and they're constantly struggling to kind of build ring roads to bypass the main city. So we kind of looked at how do you firstly, how do you define a city center? We did a comparison across, and we said that Bangalore didn't have a defined center. It's if you just see the scale, what they define as a center is like 5 times the size of Manhattan. So we have to first decide what is the center, and once we decided that, we did an extensive mapping exercise of land use, of built, unbuilt, the transportation upcoming and existing, understanding the landscape, understanding topography, and then kind of started making recommendations on how we could modify the road networks from what exists today to ensuring that there are bypasses. And the city center is largely pedestrian oriented. It's meant for people and not for vehicles crisscrossing. So key connections which are either taken underground through the center or elevated on the periphery, which actually then opens the entire core up to be centered around pedestrians. We looked at existing metro lines and existing bus stops. And what we proposed is that if you had a loop bus network, you're actually going to cover most of the city on foot. So that was another reason how you could actually prove that you can actually keep cars out of the center of the city. Once you do all of this, then you can start thinking of how do you pedestrianize, how do you define certain streets around the character of the area that they serve. So you looked at a business street, the Janpath, the institutional access, and the city boulevard, which is your along MG Road and the Cubbon Park and all those beautiful areas which are now just completely overrun by cars. And of course, Bangalore has a wonderful network of water bodies, because it's at an elevation. So, when it was designed, when the city was kind of growing, there was connected series of water tanks. So one overflows onto the other, and that's lost because everyone is kind of building around, and the interconnections between these water bodies is being lost. So we looked at ways to interconnect the green, interconnect the blue, and then we kind of cut up these districts and said, okay, now once we've done this, can we focus on districts and then look at how do we imagine the future of each of these districts. So there's a lake district around Alsur Lake, and then we have the high-rise district, which is where so not everything is just about just about maintaining things the way they are. So we looked at actually, because there's so much of public transport, we said you can actually densify certain areas, and not for residentials but for commercial. And we said we have a large your whole park in front of this can actually go high rise, and you can have like a cluster redevelopment, what we see in Bombay. And with certain norms, you can allow buildings to go higher here. Also, existing buildings where the Vidhan Soda, how do we kind of build connections which are not really there right now? They're implicit, but we looked at making them much more present in the cityscape and something that someone can experience. And also new districts that we could bring. So these are some ideas related to the city that we've kind of done at the office. And these then, the way we see this is that we publish it, we kind of go, we talk about it, and push these ideas in the public sphere, and hopefully someone listens, and then these ideas move forward. This is my last section for today. Yeah, so yeah, one of our ideas about architecture is architecture is not about about restrictive space, about limiting what a space can do, but it's about enabling. It's about opening up possibilities for people to live, to kind of opening up much more possibilities within space, and therefore looking at space which does not have very restrictive, strict, hard boundaries, but much softer space. This is a competition which we won, again, international competition. This is, it was by a tile company. So tiles, they make tiles. It's a very old German company. And they had a problem. They said, everyone's coming up with these new materials, and everyone's forgotten something as basic as ceramic tiles. How can we give new life to them? So we said, okay, ceramic tiles do two things. One is they're rigid, and second is they're static. Okay, so can we look at something which does the exact opposite, something which moves and something which is much more dynamic. So we looked at a curtain, and how can we create a curtain with the sense of a curtain just using terracotta, glazed terracotta. And these are the initial concept drawings. Of course, like I've shown before, like a lot of this is actually getting it to be built requires rigorous drawing, rigorous construction details in order to ensure that it's built. So we looked at what are called baguettes. The technical term is baguettes. So these are these long cylinders of and we painted each side. We in the competition we said let's paint each side and make a curtain out of this, and you can spin each of these. So when you spin it around, the color changes, and so you would have something like this, which would change to this, which could change to this. So it's just a billowing kind of curtain, which you just people can come and spin it around. And we said make a pavilion. It can be anywhere. It could be in Bombay. It could be in the Ran of Kutch. So we won the competition, and finally it was built in Germany. And yeah, so it didn't sit where we thought it would, but yeah, so it's there. And then so they built it exactly the way that we conceived of it. And yeah, so this whole idea of taking a material which is so basic and giving new life to it is something that was interesting. Right. This I think is our last project. Yeah, there's something there. So this is a school for little girls. This is in Bombay. So like a lot of projects in Bombay, space is a constraint. So this is hardly a 4,000 square foot plot. And, with schools, you're given a very high FSI. You have an FSI of 4. So how do you kind of have the values of a school, which is about connection to ground? The children need to play, and how do you do that when you don't have land, and you're a very harsh environment? You're right on the road, and it's noisy and it's dusty. So these are some concept diagrams. 460 square meter plot, FAR of 4. Once you leave your setbacks, it goes up to this high tower, and we had to give open space below. So we raised it at still, so it goes even higher. So then sectionally, looking at the classrooms being at the lower level, the staff space in the center, and the public spaces at the top. So the children were closer to the ground. The school for children, we just said, it doesn't have to be this hard edge building. Let it be softer, just soften the whole profile. And this was then the big move, is where this is also actually interesting. The fire department says you need two means of escape. On a 4,000 square feet plot with setbacks, 2-meter staircases. You can't do 1.5-meter staircases. You need 2-meter wide staircases. How are we going to do 2 staircases 2 meters wide on this? So what we said is we'll wrap a ramp. So this is actually a ramp which wraps around the building and it goes all the way to the 4th floor and connects. So it's a very intuitive way, so children can just run along this ramp either up or down. And if they run up, they end up at the teacher's room, and they run down, they end up at the the play area. So no prizes for guessing which way they'll be happy to run. And so they then and then you have the skin, which kind of protects this whole environment from the dusty street and the noisy street, and creates this wonderful environment for learning. Internally, you just room for 2 classrooms. This is a 2-meter staircase. So imagine if we had another 2-meter staircase. So and this is the ramp, which then winds its way around. A lot of structural kind of ideas. So you don't see any beams because there's an inverted beam on the edge. What you see here is actually an inverted beam. I'll show you in the images where it becomes a seat, so children can kind of sit. If you're tired of walking up or down, you just sit on the edge, and it then just opens the space up. And the idea of possibilities of space, we just kind of hinted at possibility, and then it's up to the occupants, the children, to kind of make it their own. The ramp then becomes a way that children from other classrooms kind of look into the classroom. This is how the building will look. It's the lower level. This is the ramp. It kind of winds its way around, and Yeah, so the idea of color, maybe you see echoes of the previous, like, so this building looks different in color from one side and completely different from the other, just in terms of what colors are used on the facade. It's for children. So yeah, so this is the lower level. And yeah, this was the inverted beam I was talking about. So this is, so you don't see any beams from the underside. Everything is inverted. You have clean RCC soffits. And, children are just happy to run across. We've now topped the first slab, uh, going up as we speak. And it's, yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a challenge because our columns are kind of elliptical in shape. uh, is very complex because you have to keep, usually you take your columns up to one level and then cast a slab. Now, each of these columns goes to different heights. So it's slightly more difficult to construct, but we actually got people saying that, they want to build this building as a challenge. So we've got some good contractors on board. And yeah, so I'm ending here, and I think there's a video that I'll share. So there are a couple of more projects, and I think these ideas run across projects. So I'm just going to just show you just a glimpse of other stuff that we're doing. These projects run across. So this is an art center in Seoul in Korea. Then yeah, I don't think I'll talk about these too much. A museum of language, which is also in Korea. It's in Incheon, in a private city, which is, in the middle of a central park there. The idea of an open building in the center. This is in Maharashtra, uh, which, metal buildings sitting on a slope, these large cantilevers sitting very lightly and leaving these large, almost telescopes looking onto the landscape. This is a school in Prague, which sits at the top of a hill, which is just the edge of the village in the forest, and an architecture college in Bangalore. uh, you know, all of this is proposed to be, donated. Building material supplies just donate material, and we create a collage of it on the facade. Um, right. I'm going to end with a video for one of our projects, and then I am done. Can you guys see my?
Yes, sir.
All right. Right. So I'll just end with this. Um, this
Thank
is
you,
what,
sir. That was a wonderful.
right, and just a minute. So this is what Albert Einstein said. Imagination is more important than knowledge, and I think that's something that personally one believes in. And that's a lot of our work is based on that. And of course, this is not, JDAP is not an individual. There are a lot of people who kind of worked across, and I put some of the names here. A lot of the names might be missing, but yeah. So that's it. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So I think we can start taking questions from the audience now. If anyone has any questions, they can unmute themselves, and if possible, then turn on your videos as well.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, I will.
Sir, it is a basic question. Like I wanted to ask that how the funding or the amount of money which the you actually the builder gives us, or according to that, how we actually think about the process. Like if we have more money, we spend a lot and try to create something extraordinary, and if the budget constraint is there, we try to look for the same kind of result but through different pathways and the process. So how actually does that changes according to the budget? So how?
Okay. Right. Yeah. So yes, definitely budget does change, like, in terms of the possibilities of, what you can do. Let's look at the school. So in the school, it's a public building. It's not a, an expensive school. Children pay, I think, 1,500 rupees a month. So it's about where do you spend, where do you spend that money? We would rather spend on, good quality concrete rather than doing expensive finishing. So it's about that, about how do you kind of balance, what's important, and where do you kind of spend that money. But money is not a limitation to idea. Often um, it is something that is like one of those contexts that you're working with. You're working with climate, working with client, you're working with an urban context, and you're working with money, like you're working with a budget. So it does not change the process. It's one of those constraints that as architects one has to kind of be aware of. Like you can't be insensitive to how much money people have to build. um, at the same time, it's like I said, it's sometimes a matter of priority, because we see a lot of projects where we wonder, where did all that money go? And it's probably gone in Italian marble, like, and who gives a damn? Like, so that is kind of, I think, some kind of value judgments that one has to make, about budgets. Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask. Thanks a lot for a phenomenal
Thanks.
presentation. I'm
Thank you.
very eye-opening. So I wanted to ask, like in the western cities in America, we see a lot of suburbs development. People tend to have a house, a small apartment nearby their office, and their homes outside. Sometimes, so like that must require a lot of planning. Do you think that sort of it's a sort of way forward? What are your thoughts on this sort of, because the cities are getting very congested, and any thoughts if it is pertinent here?
Sure. Thanks, Amit. So, right, I think, like, the idea of suburbanization, which, like, say, is a very American phenomenon. Like, there's, in fact, recently I saw a comparison between how much a city spends on an average resident in a suburb versus in the inner city, and it's almost three times that the city spends in a distributed suburbs, because in a distributed suburb, because your transport is much more expensive, garbage collection is expensive, all your services are much more expensive. So in India we have the reverse problem, um, because of the way planning works and because of way funds are allocated. Politicians are interested in putting money where there are people. Often you have to put money in areas where there are no people, and then you will, and then, like, in the future, that will kind of take off. So I think that definitely, like, um, one can't kind of have a Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, uh, Chennai forever. Like, you have to look at tier two cities, tier three cities, and look at how they develop, over time, and also the peripheries of these cities. Like, like everyone seems to think that Bombay is maybe even now, like maybe they think that it's up to Andheri and Powai, but it is. It's the peripheries of the city, the peri-urban area, which is actually is kind of very important as well. So I think we definitely have to. Yeah, sure. Anyone else?
Sir, actually, I have two questions.
Right.
So I'm Ishita Gazre from first year. So,
Hi, Ishita.
So first question I wanted to ask that how do you start designing a building? So what is the exact procedure? You see the plot and you start designing, or first there is concept in your mind and then you start designing? So how is the process?
Right. Yeah. So I think yeah. Thanks for the question, Ishita. Right. So I think that one can think of it in layers. Like you will always look at various layers of understanding. You'll understand the plot. You'll understand the program. What are you actually going to build? You'll understand climate. You'll understand like what Deba was talking. You'll understand the budget, and you kind of build up your understanding through those layers. Um, However, like it's like any creative process, it's not linear. Sometimes I guess all of you guys also know, okay, you'll sit at your drawing board and sometimes for a week nothing's happening, and then in 1 hour everything happens. So um, that's the aspect of the creative process that is a little bit of it is maybe left to chance or left to yeah, but definitely looking at the various layers of understanding uh, of what you're doing firstly, rather than having a preconceived. I think the problem is having a preconceived idea. If you say like I saw this building on Instagram or yahi karne ka hai, like that is that I think is not a great approach, because it's not the way that you will actually end up with something original, something um, appropriate also. So um, yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but it definitely helps to kind of start with a I think every project we try to start with a blank slate, try to start with a first principles, just fresh mind, um, nothing in your head. Start looking at what is there, and then you just go with the process, so that's what that's kind of like a process. I don't Yeah, is that answering your question, Nishita?
Yes, sir, I got it. But while designing, so you think of the concept first and then you design according to the plot, or I mean the plot size, because plot size varies
Right.
varies also.
Right.
So while designing the concept of the building, so
Yeah.
how do you start with that?
No, we will always look at the plot. Like you cannot you cannot have something without understanding the plot. You'll always look at the plot and then it will come from there. Looking at the plot, looking at what's around us, what is around. And so that definitely will, yeah. So it's not outside the plot and then you bring a project onto plot. It starts from an understanding of the context and the plot.
Okay,
right?
sir.
All right.
So, and one more
Yeah.
question I wanted to ask. So in the architectural competitions,
Yeah.
what do we have to show? I mean, do we actually get to construct the structure we have designed, or we have to build it in small scale? Like the way ancient buildings were built, ancient temples were built. So they were built in small scale and then built at a large scale. So
Yeah.
how do you submit in architectural competitions?
Submit. How do we submit?
Okay, so what do we have to do in this competition?
Okay. So you are sending basically a design scheme, and yeah, now a lot of these competitions are online. Some of them you do have. In fact, tomorrow we are submitting a competition in Korea, and we have a local partner, so they are printing our boards over there. we don't have any model this time, but they're printing our all our panels and they get submitted. And so I think what you might want, like what your question might be leading to, is that there are basically two kinds of competitions. One is an ideas competition, and one is an competition which is actually meant to be built. You know, we used to do ideas competitions. We don't anymore. You know, we look for projects that will get built. You know, and yeah, and yeah, your other part of the question is, how do you submit, in the sense, like, you know, what does a jury look for? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Actually, it's okay. I'll tell you a little story. So, do you guys know Richard Rogers, the architect Richard Rogers?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Richard Rogers was asked. Richard Rogers does a lot of competitions, and so, you know, Norman Foster. You guys know Norman Foster, right? So apparently, so Foster doesn't do too many competitions. So Foster asked Rogers, you know, how many competitions do you have to do to win one? And Rogers said about 10. And, you know, so you have to do 10 competitions to win one. And so Foster said, you must be really optimistic, you know. So, you know, to keep going, you know, even for us, like, you know, we do competitions, we keep winning, then we lose. And, you know, so it's definitely, it takes time. And so, to answer your question, competitions are different. Some competitions, usually you can tell by looking at the jury. Yeah, you look at the jury, you see the kind of jury. Is the jury someone who's looking for a very technological solution, a very idea-based solution, a very people-centered building, a very ecological kind of building? That's how you can get a little sense of what they're looking for. But we are not experts. We don't win every competition we enter. So I don't know. But that's a little bit of you know, how competitions are judged, right? Jita?
Yes, sir. But
Alright.
yes, I understood it. So
Yeah.
I would like to know that do we have to build it in small scale and show it to them, or we just
Sometimes, yeah. So we definitely, right now, like, you know, everything is online. So you do 3D, like you saw so many 3D renders. So you definitely have to give them a sense of how it's going to look, because that's the technology available nowadays. So we can't, you know, can't end up with a building, with a project. We just say plan sections, elevations, and people don't know how the building looks. You definitely have to show them this is how the building is going to look. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, I would like to ask a question. This is actually related to your project in
Right.
Kalyan railway station and basic, nodal systems. So, what my question is that at some point of time, if we consider Indian cities in particular, there is a urban boom. Like population influx is so high that keeping up the infrastructure with it is very difficult. So, particularly looking at personal vehicles or transport infrastructure, there will be some point in time when your future infrastructure will also congest, right? So, like, if you think about it, very limited number of options are available of what we can do. So I would really like to have your thoughts on this problem of how you make the development, future infrastructure development sustainable in a way that it is independent of course, it can't be completely independent, but
Yeah.
there must be some solutions at least.
Right. Right. See, I think there are various levels to this question. And one, again, story is, you know, I was traveling by taxi, and you know, there was a new flyover, and so the taxi guy said, "Jitna bridge banaoge, utna gaadi rahega." You know, so it's like saying that, you know, building a new bridge is like loosening your belt because you're growing fat. It's not reducing weight. You know, you'll keep loosening your belt, but you're going to keep going fat. Yeah, so personal vehicle is especially in dense urban cities like Bombay or like any of our cities, is definitely not the solution. You can't build any kind of system to at a mass transit. Like people are saying, okay, Ola and Uber are going to be the next public transport. I don't think so. So you definitely need mass transport. So one is like, let's say in the Kalyan example, or even in Thane, the other stations we've done, you prioritize the pedestrian, you prioritize the person on foot, you prioritize the guy on bicycle, you prioritize the guy coming by bus. The guy parking his car can park in a parking lot which might be 200 meters away and walk. It's we have, like, you see all these projects which even you guys do in school. Driveway chahiye, I expect someone to come chauffeur driven and get dropped off, but the guy who's coming on foot is not given priority. So as architects, giving priority to the pedestrian, to the non-motorized transport, to people traveling by public transport in the architecture that we do is very important. That will kind of start pushing the needle towards more sustainable modes of transport. The second is advocacy. Advocacy means that you have to talk about it. People have to write about it. People have to, do studies which prove that how much more efficient it is public transport. And when do you leave your car? When do you leave your bike? And when you take public transport? We're definitely decades behind. Like all the metro that is being done in all our cities today is at least 20 years too late. But I think maybe 40 years too late, but 20 at minimum. So we have to scale up as cities. We have to scale up transport infrastructure, and right, but you cannot and if you look at some cities in the West, they say you can't get your car into the city center because parking charges are so high. You're discouraged from getting a car. So you can't design a city around private transport. It will never be enough. जितने ब्रिज बनाओगे, जितने पार्किंग लॉट बनाओगे, उतनी गाड़ी आएगी. It's a never ending way to do it. So yeah, so definitely these are things that one has to look for. And I think as students, like in the way you kind of look at the city, in the way you kind of design, these are things that actually have to be part of your work. Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Sir, this is a discussion which can go on, and I think like I got this question from 2-3 books actually. So there is this disaster of American cities. So expressways and freeways pass right through the center of the city. Right. And looking at their mistakes, we are not learning from it. We are like just doing the same thing. Right. We are, of course, building ring roads and expressways and all of these things, but then government prioritizes building infrastructure which is around capitalism. So how do you think, like moving on to the next question, how do you think government policies and overall, the self-interest of capitalism has an impact on overall architecture?
At a broad level, you're not just talking transport. You're saying broadly, how does government policy?
Larger scale, I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And right, I think there's so many different ways. Like, if you look at, let's say, just the idea that, let's say, if you look at capitalism, you're saying that, we've agreed that, like, we will, governments are actually now not in the business of doing business. They're just facilitating, right? So they kind of pull out of so many spheres. All our public markets in Bombay are being handed over to developers. So what is unfortunate, and if you see, like, if you look at, let's say, the work of architects in India, maybe post-independence, like say in the 60s, 70s, a lot of them were doing great public projects, large public projects which can only be funded by the state. That is very much reduced for architects today. You don't have so many public projects happening, and you will have public projects, which happen, like you might have heard of the Central Vista project. Central Vista project was literally handed on a platter to, so there is a lot of large public projects are kind of going out of the hands of architects, and I think architects also are to blame for that, because architects do have to be much more vocal about about their role and their stance in on urban issues, and we have to kind of do that. In another way, like I think government policies might affect is like, if you look at the whole attitude to the private car. So the attitude of the government is it's a huge employment generator. If people stop buying cars, it's going to affect the economy. So that's the reverse argument, and so you have to kind of counter such arguments and deal with that. Otherwise, I think government policy really affects across. Like it affects the way how much you can build, and we do have, like say for the school project, we had to go to the Municipal Commissioner of Bombay, to get what are called concessions. Because it's such a small plot, we needed concessions. So we had to go all the way up till the commissioner, for something like that. So one wishes that there was less of all of this, that we could, simple things could get done. But that's where we are, so that's part, that's the baggage. Yeah.
Yeah, sir, surely it is. Thank you so much, sir.
Hello, sir.
Hi, Piyush.
Yeah, it was an amazing presentation. So my question was that, as we were going through your projects, we came across a lot of unique spaces. So all the designs that that were showed, each of had all of them were different, and it did not repeat a particular language. So how do you try to achieve such different spaces and designs?
Yeah. Okay, in a light-hearted way, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, but boredom is the true father. So we don't want to get bored. Okay, we keep wanting to do new stuff. So we don't like to repeat ourselves. It just gets boring. So that is definitely on a light-hearted way, and that's one reason why you see that. The other thing is that I think the idea of a style is so 19th century. So it is. It's not something that we have to worry about. That I have a signature style or something like that. I think. So we say that every project we approach with a fresh set of eyes. We say, okay, TK, we might have done schools before. This is a new school. We might have done museums before. This is a new museum, new place, new context, new client. So looking at everything with a fresh set of eyes gives us and gives the project something kind of unique to it. And though we say we don't like to repeat, and there are learnings which are embedded in the office, in the way that we do our work, and they become part of it. So we're not worried about losing a certain style, because we know that we do a project and then it's not forgotten. It's there. We might say we're doing a new project, but the previous projects are embedded in our understanding of space, in our understanding of architecture. So I think style is like I don't think anyone needs to worry about that, and it's again a very superficial concern, so we're not worried about that. And right, so I don't know if that that answers the question, Piyush?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
This is with regard to your slide on, the big and small, the industrial project. So the question really is, I mean, it was quite interesting to see the designs of the large factory and how it was kind of built. You made a specific statement that, when it's a factory, there is a very set kind of way, there are processes that kind of define the way the place needs to kind of turn out in the end. So how, I mean, when you do industrial projects, when you do factories and things like that, how is it really working with these kind of clients? Like, how do you get them to really see the value of design, even though, I mean, because they may be very, very set in their ways, very set in their ways of looking at things and how things need to turn out. So yeah, so basically, how do you really communicate and convince them to see the value in design? Thanks.
Thanks. So, in around long time back, I think you guys might have been very young, all of you students. So, in the boom of, the 2008, there was this thing that, all projects, all clients wanted landmark building within budget and built very fast. Okay, all three things. So everything is not possible. You can't do a landmark and build it on time and build it very cheap. There are always trade-offs between them. Having said that, clients are, even industrial clients, are not averse to having good buildings. They just want to ensure that the first kind of level is addressed, that is the functionality and the efficiency of operation, and they have budgets, they're very tight budgets. So if you can give them efficient working and you fit it in budget, they're happy. They might not want to admit it, but they would like a good building. So we would not talk about the ideas too much. We would look at first, getting the basic kind of working of the building done as per the way that they imagine it. And this is the added extra, so, and the conversation might go like, is that going to cost us much? And we say it's probably 5% of the project cost or 2% of the project cost. And then it's a choice by the client if they want to spend that 2% more. And there's always, again, we will say that this will help you in this different way. Yeah, so there is the clients would like better buildings, provided they're not they don't interfere with their basic requirements as well as their budget. So it's definitely much less that we get to do, but yeah, so clients are not averse to that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks
for the question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I had a question regarding, so you had mentioned some of the rural projects that you had done. So I had a question regarding that. So right now, even we in our architectural design studio, we are doing a project which is in a rural context, and it's a market kind of space. So I think most of us are facing this dilemma of how to sort of do justice or respect the context around while still sort of having a taking them forward in the rural context itself. Like we see cities moving on and developing, but we're sort of leaving out rural areas. So how do we bring them into the development through?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So one is thanks, Ayushi. So I think our rural areas, especially like everyone saw during the pandemic, we saw the connection between the rural and the urban was just laid bare. All these people kind of walking thousands of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers at least, from the cities where they work and to the villages that they lived in. So the connection between the urban and the rural is there. It's extremely strong, and yeah, so every village will kind of have some connection with Bombay or Delhi or any of these big cities, and the connections are there. Now, how does one like? So I think one way is to kind of understand that maybe one need not make a value judgment that it's one is good or bad. Like the fact that development in villages is necessary, or in development that means if I'm doing RCC in the village, that's a good thing. I'm kind of introducing them to something new. So those kind of value judgments are something that I think are sometimes counterproductive. One, I think as architects, you have to kind of, if you have a live site, look around you, like, look around you, observe. You will see things that, but I don't know how you can do it if you guys are working on a remote semester, so maybe, but we are also, so I teach at Kamala Raja, I take a design studio and thesis there. So hitting a project in Kochi, and all the students have to, we would otherwise have traveled to Kochi. All you have is photographs, like, so looking at those buildings and kind of, and then reading about it, to kind of understand that context and understand how you can build there. That's key, like, yeah, I definitely think, yes, I mean, rural areas have been ignored. However, I would not be, the best person to like, because we've not really built in rural areas, technically, none of our buildings are in rural, like, we might be doing outskirts of cities, but they're still very urban, but there are lots of wonderful practices working in India, working in rural areas, working at grassroots. And yeah, I think you guys should definitely look out for them. Yeah. Right. Ayushi, that answer your question?
Hello, sir.
Hi, Trevor. Hi.
Yes, sir. So how do we consider the climatic response when it comes to designing buildings? Like, how do we approach it?
Climatic response. Okay. I don't know if now, but we used to have a subject for climatology. Do you all still have that?
Yes, sir. We have EVS.
Okay, right. Yeah. So, I mean, looking at all the elements, like looking at the sun, like understanding your sun path, looking at your wind rose diagram, seeing which are the dominant directions of wind, looking at the land and looking at topography, looking at how water flows on the land, looking at the vegetation, looking at what is existing vegetation, and working around that. So I think all of these things are, I mean, they're parts of it, and that's part of how you would kind of approach designing with climate, and it depends on which climatic zone you're in as well. Whether in some areas you need south light. South light is good if you're in a cold hilly area, and in the winter that's where the sun is. It's in the south. Whereas in most part of the country, you don't want south light because you don't want harsh radiation, and you don't want west light. So it also depends on where you are. And yeah, so I mean, a lot of these tools are available. And in fact, I mean, what we learned in college then and what is practiced today is a huge differences. Like, you have softwares which will calculate, daylighting very accurately. It will calculate your solar incidence and heat load on your building very accurately. So lots of softwares available, and I would encourage all of you guys to look, and there are enough of YouTube videos online to learn all of these softwares. So you can take your SketchUp models, put it on the software, understand how daylighting works, understand how solar incidence works, and actually get accurate results. So it's not just I feel that the rain might enter, you'll actually be able to prove it. Or so definitely I think students nowadays have a lot of tools at their disposal, and we really have to be you really have to explore those tools.
Thank you.
So I guess we can take one more question and then we can conclude.
All right.
Is there any more questions? I guess if not, then we can conclude now.
All right.
Yeah, so I would like to thank you for having this wonderful presentation with us and for talking with all of us. And I think it was a wonderful experience for us. And we're looking forward to having you in our college once all this is over and once we start.
Chai at the workshop.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Right. Yes. Sir.
Hello, Jude. Hi.
Kalyani.
This is Kalyani Mukhasdar over here.
Hi,
the faculty.
Hello, Kalyani.
Yeah, I could not really participate right from beginning. I was having some other commitments, but parallelly the presentation was on and I was enjoying looking at it. At times I could not get engaged in other things, and I got diverted looking at this. And I really liked your ideas regarding the school having that continuous ramp with inverted beam, and the structure was resolved very nicely, especially for children, and in a compact space you gave a very nice this thing. Even the housing with connecting terraces at different angles and all, that looked absolutely innovative, like a dream. This thing, the other housing also where on the hillock, everything was towards the pond, near the pond. So you really worked on very diverse projects. And I also heard that your office, you all keep certain sponsored projects,
research projects,
in-house research projects in-house, you all do. And in that regarding housing styles, typologies across mega cities and world, all those were very interesting. And all the students who saw it, I mean, it was a treat for them. Good.
Thank you.
Even we will be, even we will be waiting for everything to become normal again, and we will meet at college surely.
Thanks, Kalyani. All right. Thank you.
So would you like to say any concluding words?
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
We can conclude now, I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Shall we ending the meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining in.